Today we're going to delve into a bit of a debate amongst people who live overseas or those who live in Asia in terms of the best places to live. And I'm talking about the great debate between two economic powerhouses in the region, and that's Hong Kong and Singapore. Now, I've lived in both of these places, so I'm going to go through sort of the pros and cons and basically try to come to a decision as to which is the best place to live out of those two. Now, I think I've made up my mind, but I want to put forward the arguments for both and then come to a conclusion. And of course, it comes down to personal preference in many ways. But I hope you get a lot out of this, because in order to decide if it's the best place for you to live, it's really a tough decision if you haven't gone there and visited. So let's break this down into a few different categories. So economic opportunities, we're talking about job opportunities. Both of them are wealthy countries. So the GDP per capita in both of these places is very high. And in fact, they're way beyond most of the countries in the region. So let's talk economics. Singapore's GDP per capita for 2024 is actually $88,000 per annum. Hong Kong's is a little lower at $52,000 per annum. So they are both economic powerhouses. Hong Kong specifically its economy is really focused on the finance sector. The economy of Singapore is still a little bit more diverse, but finance is also a part of that as well. So you can see that the wealth certainly exists in both of these places, and that's very evident when you arrive and you check out some of the infrastructure. So we just look at some of the numbers in terms of demographics. So Singapore's population is around 5.9 million, nearly 30% being expats. Hong Kong's population has fallen a little to 7.2 million, and at about 9% of that population in Hong Kong would be considered expats. Now, Singapore's diversity is often seen as being a little bit more welcoming and very much celebrating multiculturalism. Hong Kong, very vibrant, and also has a percentage of expats, and certainly people from various places that love to work there and have lived there in many cases for a long time. But I suppose it's sort of been seen as just a little bit volatile in recent years, with an increase of Chinese influence and sort of a little bit of political instability, I suppose. Both countries are dominated by Chinese origins, and so the population is largely ethnic Chinese in both places. That's more significant in Hong Kong, of course, and Hong Kong is in many ways a little like the southern parts of China. So Cantonese is the Chinese language that is spoken predominantly in Hong Kong, as opposed to Mandarin. There is probably less diversity in Hong Kong in terms of population. The thing about Singapore was, as well as the Chinese influence, there is the Malay influence, which is a big part, and many people obviously speak Bahasa. There's also a significant population from Indonesia, from India, from the Philippines, and it certainly is more diverse. And when you're sitting in a coffee shop on Orchard Road in the middle of Singapore, watching people go by, you really don't have any idea as to whether those people are tourists or people that live there, because of the huge diversity of the place. As a teacher when I was in Singapore, I really loved the diversity of our classes. And in many countries in international schools, local students aren't able to go to the international school. So in Singapore, that was the case, that had an incredible mixture of students. Didn't have any Singaporeans in our classes. We had students from Japan, from Korea, from China, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from the Philippines, as well as, of course, European and American students. In Hong Kong, a little bit less diversity, I suppose, but Hong Kongers were actually able to go to international schools. So that meant that actually you were teaching people from the place that you were living in, which isn't always the case. But I really did like the diversity of Singapore, so I would put that as a big check in favour of living in Singapore. And I think that probably contributed to the food as well, such diversity of incredible food in Singapore. Hong Kong's food is great, and it's predominantly Chinese, but it's not quite what you would expect if you're a foreigner coming from the US, Canada, Australia. It's not quite the Chinese food that we think is Chinese food. In fact, it's not dominated by beef and black bean and sweet and sour pork, for example. Now, just to give you some background information, I lived in both places twice. So I was originally in the Philippines, and from the Philippines I moved to Singapore. It was a place I really wanted to live. And I lived there for 4 years before moving to China. And then years later I went back and was there for another 2 years. So So 6 years in Singapore. Hong Kong was a little bit of a similar story. After living in China for 3 years, I moved to Hong Kong, and we were there for, my wife and I and 2 daughters, we were there for 4 years. We then went back to Australia for a little while, and then later on came back to Asia. Those 2 years in Singapore were followed by 4 years back in my old school, in fact, in Hong Kong. So I've had 8 years in Hong Kong, 6 years in Singapore. So throughout all of this time, I've struggled to work out which was the best place to live. Singapore was the first desired destination where I thought I could settle down and live for a long time. And Hong Kong came a little later, but it ended up becoming a little bit more like home because my 2 daughters graduated when we were there in Hong Kong. And just because of the job that I had and the particular part of Hong Kong that we ended up living in, it became a little bit more like home because it was more of a family thing. I was actually in Singapore for quite a long time on my own. Okay, so let's look at quality of life now. And I enjoyed my time in both places, and I would say the quality of life was extremely high in both of these places. Let's start with Singapore. So Singapore is very clean, it's very safe. It's famous for being safe. It's famous for having this reputation of lots of fines for various things, but that's actually not really the reality. You really don't get fined every single time you might litter, although you don't see any litter. And it is extremely clean, extremely safe. As I mentioned before, the food is amazing and comes with such diversity. So all of these things add to the quality of life. But it is expensive. So apartments are really expensive. You might get a little bit more space in Singapore compared to Hong Kong, but you certainly pay quite a lot. It is an expensive place. For people going out and drinking, alcohol is extremely expensive in Singapore. And so therefore, you're always sort of trying to work out where the happy hour was, where the specials were for drinking. If you wanted to go out and drink, a huge part of your salary would often get eaten up with dining out and drinking in bars, if that's what you were into. Both places have really good transport infrastructure. So Singapore's MRT is really cheap, very modern, pretty much covers every place that you want to go. But of course, there are also buses. Hong Kong, also similarly pretty efficient, covering a huge part of Hong Kong, but it's a little bit older, maybe slightly deteriorating, but still very efficient. Just doesn't look quite as clean and modern as the one in Singapore, I suppose. The other thing is parks and space. So Singapore is often described as being a city inside a garden. And so it is really green, which is nice. And I would say that it's certainly a beautiful place. Some people would call it a little bit sterile, but it depends on where you are. There are lots of green areas. You can go hiking, although it's sort of limited. Hong Kong actually has some amazing beaches and islands and white sand beaches as well. So where I used to live, I could go hiking on the weekend. I would go regularly to the beach for a swim. And camping was a big thing, camping on beautiful beaches that I would compare favourably to those from Australia as well. Now, something else about Singapore is that it's very flat. There are little opportunities for hiking, but it's generally very flat. It's very small, and it has virtually no variety in terms of climate. It's pretty much hot and humid all year long. Sometimes it's hot, humid and wet. That's the variety that you get. Hong Kong, on the other hand, it has variety. It has summers and winters. Those summers and winters might seem a little short sometimes, but it does get what I would call reasonably hot, so in the 30s, but it also gets reasonably cool, down to, 10 degrees and even lower in the wintertime. I really like that variety because if you want to do things like hiking, cycling, running, those kinds of things. But in the middle of summer, it was also very hot and very humid as well. I'm still talking about quality of life. If you're single, there's a pretty vibrant night scene in Hong Kong. There are lots of bars and nightclubs. It is a very exciting place. It's very colourful, vibrant, exciting place. Singapore is more like sort of work hard and party little, I suppose, but it still has lots of opportunities for drinking, which is a big part of the expat culture, of course. But I wouldn't say it's a party capital as such. I'd say that Hong Kong offers a little bit more in terms of exciting nightlife for singles, for young people. For families, you might argue that Singapore has the edge, wins in terms of more green spaces, but I think that's only really talking about Singapore compared to Hong Kong Island, because Hong Kong certainly has more green spaces once you get off the island. but Singapore might be the, I guess, the ideal location if you're talking about families regarding safety, open spaces, parks, and family-friendly activities, perhaps. Now, if we want to focus on outdoor leisure activities, this is where I would say Hong Kong wins hands down. Hiking trails, and those trails are out in the new territory areas, but even on Hong Kong Island, Hong Kong is rugged, it's mountainous. There are lots and lots of hiking trails. As well as the hiking trails, you definitely have, like I said before, amazing beaches. And it's a real culture of sort of jumping on junk boats and doing junk boat tours and going off to different islands and going around to various beaches from either from a Hong Kong island or from other places where you live. So the junk boat culture is pretty cool. Singapore has sort of a more toned down version of each of those things. Because it's flat though, maybe cycling is a little easier and more accessible in Singapore. And there are many places like East Coast Park, for example, and there's the West Coast version of that as well, where a lot of people will go and spend their time with families. They'll do things like rollerblading, hiking. So who wins the ultimate showdown? Well, I guess it depends on your own preferences and your own individual situation, okay? So if you are looking for financial opportunity and an exciting city life, then maybe Hong Kong is the place for you. If you want a balanced lifestyle, safer streets, fantastic education options, and a growing economy, Singapore is actually pretty hard to beat in 2025. I spent more time in Hong Kong than Singapore. I lean slightly towards Hong Kong, but only very slightly. And I'd say the reasoning at the moment, after 3 years in Thailand and complaining about the heat and humidity, probably Hong Kong just edges it for me because you have variety in two ways. You have variety in climate, so you actually experience seasons, which is unlike the tropics where I am now. And the other variety is variety in terms of landform. So you have, it's not completely flat, you have hiking opportunities and the beaches as well. Being an Australian, it's hard for me to survive without having good beaches to go and visit on the weekends, okay? However, countering that, the variety of Singapore's population, the multiculturalism, that is almost strong enough to draw me back to Singapore again. And the food, it is a really, really tough decision. You'll have a great quality of life regardless of where you live. And I hope that this video has helped you a little bit if you're thinking about going and living in one of those two places. So it all depends on your own personal goals. Let me know in the comments, which city would you choose to live and work in? And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more videos about living and working abroad. Thanks for joining me on my walk around Benjikiti Park here in Bangkok, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.